Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello, I'm Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and today's podcast host. Today we're going to take a dive into a monumental decision out of Michigan Supreme Court this summer on paid sick leave and minimum wage that has employers and workers very concerned going forward. A big welcome to three folks today who are going to help us unpack this topic. Josh Lunger, the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Grand Rapids Chamber. Kelli Saunders, the Vice President of Policy and Engagement at the Small Business Association of Michigan. And the Michigan Chamber's very own Wendy Block. She is our Senior Vice President of Business Advocacy. And welcome all. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a tough subject. I know a lot of all of our members, a lot of people in the business community are concerned, and a lot of employees are concerned as well of how this is going to impact them, their ability to earn and to make sure they have good employment going forward. Wendy, I want to start with you. If you could just kind of give us a little quick background, set the stage for what happened at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so a lot of people kind of question, how do we get here? Like, this is kind of crazy. Kind of came out of left field. But as you mentioned, the Michigan Supreme Court issued a monumental decision going back to July in a case that we've been watching for a number of years. It's called the Mothering Justice case. We often refer to it as the Adopt and Amend case. And it puts into law two 2018 ballot proposals, which were never voted on by the people, but instead adopted and subsequently amended by the legislature. And those two ballot proposals were dealing with two different issues, one on minimum wage, one on paid sick leave. And so we'll have two sweeping new laws that will go into effect in February 21 of 2025. The concern here is that this was a very political decision by the Michigan Supreme Court. We had hoped that they would focus on the words in the Michigan Constitution and say that what the legislature did was constitutional, but they didn't. And we are out of appeals. So really, we're focused on the legislative fight ahead of us because we're concerned that if these laws were to go into effect as written, the impact will be felt deep and wide by job providers and, frankly, for workers, that this could very, very well end up hurting the very workers these ballot proposals were intended to help.
Was the decision by the court, Wendy, to deal with what the legislature did and the words they put in, or was it more about timing?
It was more about kind of process and timing. So this question of whether the legislature had the right not to necessarily adopt a ballot proposal, because the Constitution is very clear on that. But it had to do with the question of whether they had the ability to adopt and subsequently amend in the same legislative session. Now, the Constitution doesn't talk about the timeline under which the legislature can amend, but this court said, no. We believe that the Constitution says, again, we don't think these words are supported in the Constitution, but it says, they said they can't amend until a subsequent legislative session. But they still then reserve the right to be able to amend this legislative session or next legislation or any future legislative session by a simple majority vote.
So if the legislators would have taken the vote few weeks or months later, the court said, oh, what you did was fine, we just don't like the time.
Yes, exactly.
And they just determined the time on their own. It's not what the Constitution talks about.
Correct.
Well, that's a little frustrating. Josh, I want to turn to you a little bit. You know, the minimum wage and earned sick time here are kind of elements that have been considered. Can you walk us through the Earned Sick Time Act? And that's garnered a lot of attention. Why is this a problem?
Yeah, and I would say I've been with the Grand Rapids Chamber for 13 and a half-ish years. I haven't seen the level of kind of shock, concern, uncertainty about a looming decision as much as we've seen on this. And much like we're experiencing with our members, we're also experiencing with the members of the legislature as the three of us and our colleagues go and try to communicate what's going on. The minimum wage is pretty well understood, but the Earned Sick Time Act really isn't as well understood. And so basically how it works is employers will now have to track that for every 30 hours worked, employees will accrue 1 hour of earned sick time. And they have to allow up to 72 hours a year used, and employees can also roll over unused time up to a certain amount. And so what's been really alarming, though, is that this is really painting with you don't want to say a broad brush, more like a hammer or a sledgehammer. There's no exemptions for size of employer or type of employee. There's a lot of concerns about who's in and who's out, and we've kind of struggled as associations with what attorneys are telling us versus what the department is saying, and what guidance do we give our members. We think it's forcing employers to rethink their PTO bank approach and their flexibility in their policies. And then there's a couple of things that I think are less uncertain but are just as worrying, and that's things like how you communicate with your employer when you take this time. The definition of as soon as practicable isn't listed in the bill, or in the law, but that's what it's required. And so we've heard a ton from employers, especially in the hospitality industry and small businesses, that this is going to really open them up to some significant harm. And then lastly, a couple of things about limiting documentation. The rebuttable presumption that the burden of proof is on the employer. If any decision is taken, it's generally assumed basically the employer is harming an employee or taking an action against an employee because of them using this benefit. And so as we've moved forward, the three of us and all of our partners have been really clear, like, we're not trying to take any of these items away from employees or employers. We're trying to make this a workable provision, because what we're hearing from our members over and over again is that this is just obviously written extremely poorly, and implementing it is going to be a nightmare. There's a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah. You talk about the 72 hours. Now, is that something that I think you said they can carry it forward too? So does this build up into a huge bank, and maybe 3, 5, 7 years down the road they have all these hours built up that they can use?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the cap is 240, and it can roll forward. And I'd love to see someone say how they're going to do it as a small business, but you have to track when it's accrued, how it's accrued, and how it's taken, and you have to do it in the smallest amount that you track time. And so that's really causing concerns as well for employers about just illogical ways that this is written that doesn't work based on how employers and employees actually have relationships, or how they actually design their programs.
Yeah. Kelli, I'd like you to weigh in on this a little bit from the small business perspective. It seems like a lot of burdens are going to be coming down to small businesses across Michigan. Do they have the sophistication, the technology, the consultants to help them do this? Because I got to believe if this is in statute and they aren't fully complying and they can't be audited, there's going to be some problems to be had.
Yeah, I have to laugh a little bit when Josh says, I want to know how small businesses are going to do this, because they're wondering the same as we have this conversation. When you talk about sophistication and, the consulting or the processes in place in order to do this, in some instances, are our small businesses sophisticated ahead of the curve? Of course they are. But also there are smaller of the, the smallest of the small that aren't up to that kind of, level of knowing how to implement something like this. Also, we do have people, small business owners in communities out there that they're not even really fully aware that this is happening right now, and that's even more terrifying. And so how are we able, like Josh said, to take the edge off here a little bit and talk about a true implementation plan that sets everyone up for success? Because right now, small businesses across Michigan, across all industries, across every community, are not equipped at the end of the day in order to handle this. And they are going to have to lean on people who know how to implement a system like this, and that costs money. And so when you're talking about a small business owner who is the HR compliance officer, who takes out the trash, who fixes the copy machine, that is just one more thing for them to deal with. And let's just be very plain language about this. This is completely erroneous and unfair to put this on these small business owners.
Wendy, what are you hearing from our members as far? I know we have great employers. All of our organizations represent people who are trying to better their communities, help their employees, really strengthen Michigan's economic competitiveness. If I'm an employer and I have a very generous plan and I already have PTO well in excess of 72 hours, can I just ignore this?
I think a lot of people wish that were the case, but unfortunately it's not. And there's not like really a quick fix here for most employers. So even employers who offer very generous paid time off to their employees, well in excess of the 72 hours mandated by the Earned Sick Time Act, they will need to make significant changes to those policies. And that's because of the things that Josh talked about. The Act really works to micromanage how that time can be taken and how it can be used. So it requires time to be used in the smallest of increments that the employer uses to track payroll. For some of our members, that's in 1 minute increments. Others, it's 6. Maybe you're lucky it's 15 minutes. That is very problematic, right? When you start talking about 72 plus hours of time and being able to be used in 1 or 6 minute increments. This idea of advance notice, right? Kind of tying employers' hands behind their back in terms of advance notice. Only requires the employee to give notice as soon as practicable. From a staffing standpoint, that is very problematic. Like we think about our members in the home healthcare industry. The policy in that industry generally is no work or no call, no show, no job. Because you have someone in their home that's waiting for that home healthcare aide to come and to administer medication, maybe to turn someone over so they don't get bed sores, to do other things. Maybe it might be feeding, helping with bathroom duties. And, this just doesn't work for certain industries. Just be like, oh, you decided you didn't want to come today and you didn't want to give us notice, like no problem. For other industries, it's a life or death situation. So, our members are really just hair on fire trying to wrap their heads around how are they even going to do this? What is it going to cost them in terms of compliance costs? We haven't spent a lot of time talking about the minimum wage issue. There's a huge issue there for the hospitality industry as it relates to the full elimination of the tip minimum wage. And you're talking about huge increases in labor costs.
Josh, a lot of times with these statutes, there's a lot of definitions that have to be metered out. There's a lot of intricacies. How was this drafted? Do we know exactly who an employee is, who it's covered? Who am I providing this time off to?
No, and that's part of the uncertainty. We all know, and we hear from our members, uncertainty is a big part of the challenge here. I think Kelli hit on it really well, too. You've got folks who they're already doing so many roles in their business, and now they're like watching this date tick closer, and they might go to Leo's FAQ, the department's FAQ, and be like, oh, well, they say I can front load, but then they hear from their association, well, we really don't want to tell you that you can because what if you're the one that gets sued? What if you're an independent contractor? And I was talking to a small business owner who was like, oh, I'm good. I'm not worried because I do most of my stuff through independent contracting. I'm sure it's exempted. And I'm like, well, you might want to check this out.
Logistically, how would you ever give time off to an independent contractor? Somebody, by definition, is not your employee. You don't compensate them that way.
Yeah. You would just have to say...
That's the point.
Time.
You wouldn't.
Right. You have to tally your time just for the purposes of this act and then try to pay time off based on that.
Yeah, the hard part, this is only one half of a bad equation. Kelli, I want to turn to you a little bit about some of the minimum wage aspects as well. The restaurant, the hospitality businesses, they face significant jeopardy with the tip wage aspect. Can you explain a little bit what that is and why it's concerning?
Sure. So in the original ballot language, the tip credit was essentially phased out in order to increase the minimum wage altogether. And so it was set in the ballot language on a timetable to increase the minimum wage and phase out the tip credit. And so now, 5 years later, obviously that table that was created is essentially, null and void. And so with the Michigan Supreme Court ruling, the written response was actually creating essentially a new wage scale for the next 5 years. And so just to give, some context to this, essentially in 2025, the new minimum wage would go to $12.48, and the new tipped wage percentage would be 48%. Moving up to 2026, $13.29, 60%. 2027, 14.16 with 70%, 2028, 14.97 with 80% on the tipped wage, and essentially in 2029, the tipped wage would be completely eliminated. And so we're seeing that increase based on inflation moving forward for a new minimum wage. Well, as we think about specifically the hospitality industry, that is extremely concerning for numerous reasons. We know that from that industry, most people who are in the tipped wage system earn way more than minimum wage, and they like it because it gives them the flexibility. They have the ability to work in the way that they want to. Also, from a business owner's perspective, we're talking about the ability to be more fluid in their operation. And so what we're hearing from our members is that they have to start thinking about their business model completely different given these costs are going to be higher. Do they increase their food costs? Do they move away from that service component? When you walk into a restaurant, you sit down and you expect a waiter or waitress to come to your table and serve you. Do they move more towards food runners, automation, all those things in order to make sure that they are still viable within their communities? Well, that also puts a whole new perspective onto the consumer. Not only are you going to be paying more for food at a restaurant, you're also going to be gaining potentially less service, which is what people go out to do when they're, enjoying their communities. And so essentially we're seeing, this industry after COVID being pushed to the brink, especially almost being pushed over the cliff. And so this is extremely concerning for this industry specifically and what it looks like moving forward in Michigan.
Wendy, have we seen, obviously minimum wage is an issue across the country. Have we seen this in other jurisdictions, other states, other municipalities? And what was the impact? My assumption is not only the impact on the employer, but as Kelli was saying, you're going to really change the dynamic of that business, and you're probably going to have less people actually needing a job.
Yeah, so only 7 states don't have a tipped minimum wage today. That does not include Michigan being added to this list potentially if the legislature doesn't act. But, we've seen the examples in other states where restaurants just close. They run the numbers. I came from a member forum where restaurateurs had run the numbers and they say there is just no way to make this math work. I don't even dare to try. I just don't see a path here. The Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association did a survey of its members. They believe that over 40 to 60,000 jobs will be lost in Michigan. And 94% of restaurants surveyed would have to raise their prices. So customers can expect a 25% increase in menu prices. So anyway, you kind of slice and dice this. Employees like the current system. Restaurant owners are saying the math doesn't work. This doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for our customers. People like the system as how it is today. And, our hope is that the legislature will listen to that, will listen to the concerns that businesses and workers are making on both of these issues and come back to the table and say, we need to find a better solution. But what is slated to go into effect in February isn't it. Now, the timeline for that is very tight. The legislature is not going to be in very many session days between now and the end of the year. But we need legislators from both sides of the aisle to listen to their constituents.
So do we get closer to maybe like a European system? Maybe the prices, the restaurateur has to raise the price, so somebody's not going to tip because somebody's getting paid minimum wage. So
yeah, you pull back. Yeah. It comes out kind of in the wash. I think the concern is just the increase in menu prices. That the restaurant will have to raise the price of the omelet, 25% plus. And does the person even want to go to the restaurant, even if they know or think, well, I don't really have to tip anymore? But in that case, if the person stops tipping, the server ends up with minimum wage in their pocket and they actually end up making less money. And so then do you want to be in that industry anymore? I mean, just the dominoes on this, and no matter how you slice it and dice it, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, which is why we're advocating for changes by the legislature.
Josh, it sounds a lot that this actually could end up hurting the people who said that it was aimed to benefit. How did we get there? Was there a group in Michigan that started this, or how did we get to the ballot proposal part?
Yeah, I just want to say real quick to that last point about confusion around tipping and not tipping and I've been presenting with some of my team out at some of the neighborhood business associations, just trying to get out to folks that maybe are small, they haven't been really engaged on this. To Kelly's point earlier about some folks just aren't aware. And a couple of restaurant owners have already shared that they've seen a noticeable decline in tips because they believe their customers, and they were kind of talking to their staff about it, are already thinking this is in effect and have stopped tipping as much or tipping at all on bills. And so just kind of crazy to think about the impact that's going to have that. I would have never known if someone would have had to raise their hand and told us that. But how did we get here? Yeah, there was a ballot initiative or a I always get the two mixed up. I don't know. It's been a long week, but obviously we talked about it in 2018 after working on getting signatures. They were able to get sufficient amount of signatures to present it to the legislature, and then that goes into the history that.
But was this a Michigan group that started this, or somebody out of state?
Oh yeah, no. That's kind of the crazy thing is. When you track the funding for this and who actually led it, it's not the folks that are being impacted by it, right? There was a funny side-by-side from the rally of tipped employees at the Capitol yesterday that someone put on social media, and like, here's the rally for the people that want to eliminate tip credit, and it's 3 people and a microphone, and then here's the rally of the folks that want to keep it, and it's all the people that are working in that system and know the benefits of it, and so I think it's kind of crazy to think that we're at this point today, but folks that want to come out from the state and push an agenda and spend enough money can have this impact.
Kelli, can you give us a little insight into timelines here? Is this, as Josh was just mentioning there, some people think it's already in effect. Is it in effect, and what do business leaders and owners and job providers need to know about timing for compliance?
I mean, I guess this is one thing that we can be thankful is a strong word to use, but the Supreme Court did delay implementation until February 21st of 2025. So it does give us this window to work with the legislature to rectify the wrongs, we'll say, of the Supreme Court and what was handed down. So no, it is not by any means in effect today. However, our window is very tight, to Wendy's point, and so activating our members and getting them involved to reach out to their legislators to share this message that this is a problem is so important as we do our work here in Lansing to make the case on all the details on what needs to happen. But those stories from our members are the most important piece to this puzzle right now, as legislators are in their districts campaigning, obviously, to return to Lansing, but also for the Senate, who's not up this year, to really be hearing those concerns through their legislative offices.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can really underestimate the value of communicating with the legislator and really putting a face to the story and letting them know how it's going to impact. Wendy, it sounds like both sides of the proposal are very damaging. A lot of concern, employees and employers. What's going on? Are people working together? Is there a coalition? Is there communication to legislators?
Yeah, so we have spent the summer really working to educate legislators on both sides of the aisle. The Michigan Chamber has organized a statewide coalition on this issue, on the earned sick time issue. We're kind of deferring to our friends in the restaurant and bar industries on the minimum wage side of it, simply because this hits them the hardest. But the earned sick time coalition is over 70 members strong at this point. Great cross-section of the economy represented. And we really feel like that is going to be helpful in terms of building grassroots and building pressure on lawmakers and to get them to say, when they come back to Lansing, this is a top priority. We need to vote on a solution. We need to find that landing spot so we, the blow isn't so big.
Josh, what are you hearing from legislators as you and others are out speaking to them? And what's the outlook for getting something done?
Well, I think both my colleagues on the call shared a nice insight into how many people are engaged and how important it is that folks speak up. And we've seen that have an impact. So we've heard from members of the legislature on both sides of the aisle that the businesses that are directly contacting them are having an effect. And we've been told by those that agree with us, keep it up. They need to keep calling in. They need to keep showing up. They need to keep emailing because the urgency is something that I think we're all kind of struggling with. While we are, for the most part, have received a lot of positive reception from both Democrats and Republicans, this is still a hard thing to do. The strategy that the coalition has taken to really focus on making this workable, making it an implementation focus, not trying to pull back benefits, I think has been recognized and really supported by leadership. But that still means we have to get bills introduced. We have to get in a very narrow time frame with very few days left in the legislative calendar, we've got to get something moved, and there's all the sausage making that has to happen still. And unfortunately, as Kelli pointed, as businesses are navigating this, it comes with cost. They have to start thinking about with their attorneys or their HR contractors, whatever. What do I have to start changing in the next few months? And we're not going to be able to tell them, hey, we're going to solve this or that. And they might have to start all that work and start spending that cost, and then get pulled in a different direction. And so I would say that we've been, to summarize, I've talked too long, but to summarize, the reception's been great, but there are a ton of obstacles ahead of us still.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that just concerns me most as an employer ourselves at the Michigan Chamber and also as an attorney, a lot of these issues are going to get litigated, and people are almost trying to fly blind a little bit. You're trying to figure out how to create the right monitoring systems and reporting systems, and you don't have the appropriate guidance, which I think is going to be really difficult. We're coming to an end here, but I want to go around the horn, give everybody one last chance. One thing that you would like our listeners to take away from today's conversation, and Kelli, we'll start with you.
Sure. So just to reiterate again, nobody's story is more important than the business owner's story. And so sharing that with whomever represents you in Lansing is very important. And I will say, whatever changes that we hopefully can get through the legislature, it does require the governor's signature. And so sharing that message with the governor's team is equally important as it is with your legislators. And so that outreach is going to be imperative as we move forward towards the end of this year, hopefully getting something across the finish line that softens the blow, but also sharing with your respective community members that don't want to see that restaurant go away or that bowling alley or whatever industry. Pick any business that's in your community. This is going to take a true grassroots effort, and we need to do it together.
Josh, final thought?
Kelli said what I would want to say better, so I'll just say, in addition to that if folks have questions because there's so much uncertainty, they are not bothering us or any of these associations by picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, can you walk me through this? This is why chambers and small business association exist, is so we can support our members through things that are hard like this. And so we hope they engage, but they also hope that they reach out if they need help.
Right. Wendy, you get the final word.
Yeah, would definitely agree with that. And I guess I would add too, business leaders are often a very respected voice in their community and with their employees. And so in addition to educating lawmakers, asking business leaders to educate lawmakers on why the ruling is problematic, how this will impact your place of business, your bottom line, talk about your employees, but also talk to your employees about the hard decisions that might be ahead for you, how things might need to change in February. And to say, if you don't like this, you too need to make your voice heard. We've seen a lot of that with the Save My Tips, MI Tips coalition. Over 600 servers came to the state capitol yesterday to make their voices heard. There's a need to do this on both issues. I would say the learning curve on the earned sick time piece is probably still a little bit steeper than it is on the minimum wage issue. But again, business leaders have a huge role to play here. Their voice is imperative on this issue. And really, we just need people to continue to step up.
Right. Well, once again, unfortunately, time goes by fast in all these conversations, but a very special thanks to Josh, Kelli, and Wendy for their work on the issue and also for updating us today. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Tune in to our next episode. Subscribe or like our podcast for easy notifications. And until then, make sure you are getting engaged, make your voice heard. And if you need more information on this or any other topic impacting your business, go to michamber.com.